New York 2012 cold case solved. Arrest devastates fashion industry. The handcuffs clicked shut at 7:32 a.m. on September 23, 2025, exactly 13 years after Sophia Laurent, the 26-year-old fashion blogger whose style empire Chic Ethics had revolutionized how young women thought about conscious fashion, vanished from her Soho loft while investigating what she called the industry's bloodiest secret. When FBI agents led away 58-year-old Richard Blackstone, the legendary fashion executive whose luxury conglomerate controlled dozens of the world's most coveted brands, the collective gasp could be heard from Milan runways to the corporate boardrooms of every major fashion house. Richard Blackstone wasn't just another fashion mogul. He was the emperor, the man whose aesthetic vision had shaped global style for 3 decades, whose approval could launch unknown designers to international fame, and whose luxury empire generated over $15 billion annually across couture, ready-to-wear, accessories, and beauty. He was also the man who had mentored Sophia from unknown blogger to industry insider, who had given her exclusive access to fashion weeks and factory tours, and who had spoken emotionally at her memorial about the tragic loss of fashion's most promising voice of conscience. But as the FBI would reveal in the devastating evidence that followed, Richard Blackstone had been orchestrating the most ruthless cover-up in fashion history. Sophia Laurent was everything the fashion world needed in 2012. At 26, she possessed the rare combination of impeccable style sense, investigative instincts, and moral clarity that separated authentic influencers from mere trend followers. With her effortless French girl chic, tousled blonde hair, expressive green eyes, and the kind of understated elegance that made expensive clothes look accessible, Sophia had built a following that bridged high fashion and ethical consumption. But Sophia was far more than her perfectly curated Instagram feed suggested. She held a master's degree in international relations from Georgetown, had worked as a researcher for Human Rights Watch before starting her blog, and had spent 2 years living in Cambodia investigating garment factory conditions. Her blog, Chic Ethics, wasn't just about beautiful clothes. It was about the human cost of fashion and the possibility of creating beauty without exploitation. What made Sophia truly revolutionary was her ability to make ethical fashion aspirational rather than preachy. While other activists focused on the horrors of fast fashion, Sophia showcased gorgeous alternatives, fair trade artisans, sustainable designers, and vintage treasures that proved conscious consumption could be more stylish than mindless shopping. Her success was unprecedented for a blogger in 2012. Chic Ethics attracted 2.8 million monthly readers. Her collaborations with ethical brands consistently sold out, and Vogue had just hired her as a contributing editor focused on sustainability. At 26, Sophia was positioned to become the conscience of an industry desperately in need of moral leadership. On November 15, 2012, Sophia was deep into an investigation that she had told friends would be game-changing for the entire industry. For weeks, she had been working late nights in her Soho loft, following leads on what she described as systematic human trafficking disguised as fashion manufacturing. Sophia's best friend and photographer, Emma Dubois, was the last person to see her alive. Emma had stopped by Sophia's loft at 10:30 p.m. to help her prepare for a crucial interview scheduled for the following day. Sophia was both excited and terrified, Emma later told investigators. She kept saying she had evidence that would expose the darkest secret in fashion, something about luxury brands using forced labor in ways that went far beyond sweatshops. She had documents, photos, even recordings that she said proved major fashion houses were directly involved in human trafficking. Security footage from Sophia's building showed her leaving her loft at 11:47 p.m. on November 15th, carrying a large messenger bag and what appeared to be a manila envelope. She seemed nervous, frequently checking over her shoulder as she walked toward the elevator. The footage showed Sophia getting into a black town car that was waiting outside her building. The license plate was partially obscured, but investigators later determined the vehicle was registered to Blackstone Industries' corporate fleet. Sophia never returned to her loft. When she failed to appear for her scheduled 9 a.m. interview with documentary filmmakers who were working on a film about fashion industry labor practices, Emma became concerned and called the police. Detective Maria Santos of the NYPD's Special Victims Unit was assigned to the case within hours. Santos recognized immediately that this wasn't a typical missing person case. Sophia's high profile, her recent claims about discovering industry secrets, and the nature of her advocacy work made foul play seem likely from the beginning. The initial investigation revealed several disturbing facts. Sophia's computer had been remotely wiped sometime during the night of her disappearance, despite being password protected and disconnected from the internet when she left. Her backup drives, which she kept hidden in her bedroom safe, were missing, along with all physical documents related to her current investigation. Most telling was what investigators found in Sophia's loft. Signs of a hasty but thorough search. Drawers had been opened and closed, papers had been rifled through, and several items that friends confirmed Sophia would never leave behind, including her grandmother's antique camera and a necklace she wore every day, were missing. Richard Blackstone was among the first people Emma contacted when Sophia failed to return. As the fashion executive who had become Sophia's most important industry mentor, he seemed like the logical person to help locate her. Blackstone seemed genuinely distraught, Detective Santos recalled years later. He immediately offered to use his industry connections to help find Sophia. He talked about what a brilliant young woman she was, how much she meant to the cause of ethical fashion. He appeared to be doing everything possible to help. The investigation expanded rapidly as news of Sophia's disappearance spread through the fashion world. Industry insiders, fellow bloggers, and advocacy groups provided information about her recent activities and the investigation she had been pursuing. What emerged was a picture of a young woman who had been following an extremely dangerous story involving connections between luxury fashion brands and criminal organizations that trafficked women for both labor and sexual exploitation. Several sources confirmed that Sophia had been investigating what she believed was a sophisticated network that used legitimate fashion businesses as fronts for human trafficking operations. The case attracted international attention when Sophia's story was covered by major fashion publications and human rights organizations. Her disappearance became a symbol of the dangers faced by journalists and activists who challenged powerful corporate interests. Blackstone became the public face of the fashion industry's response to Sophia's disappearance. He appeared at press conferences, organized benefit events to fund the search, and used his influence to keep the story in fashion media. His emotional appeals for information about Sophia's whereabouts garnered sympathy from the industry and her millions of devoted readers. But as months passed with no credible leads, the case began to go cold. The fashion world mourned Sophia as a visionary whose voice had been silenced just as she was beginning to create real change. Her blog became a memorial site, and several ethical fashion brands launched collections in her honor. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh joined the Bureau's Human Trafficking Unit in 2019, 7 years after Sophia's disappearance. Walsh specialized in cases involving the intersection of legitimate businesses and criminal trafficking operations, bringing both advanced investigative techniques and deep understanding of how corporations could be used to hide serious crimes. Walsh's review of the Sophia Laurent case began in late 2024, focusing on digital evidence that might not have been properly analyzed using 2012-era technology. She was particularly interested in Sophia's wiped computer and the possibility that fragments of her final investigation might be recoverable using modern forensic techniques. The breakthrough came from cloud storage that hadn't been widely used in 2012, but that Sophia had been experimenting with as a security backup for her most sensitive work. Hidden in an early Dropbox account that investigators had overlooked were encrypted files that contained the evidence Sophia had died trying to expose. Using advanced decryption methods, Walsh was able to extract thousands of pages of documentation showing how Blackstone Industries had been using its manufacturing operations as cover for systematic human trafficking. The files revealed that the company maintained factories in Southeast Asia where women were held against their will, forced to work in textile production, and trafficked for sexual exploitation by corporate clients. But the most damning evidence came from recorded conversations between Blackstone and his criminal associates. The recordings revealed that several luxury fashion brands were not just turning a blind eye to trafficking, they were actively participating in it, using their global supply chains to move trafficked women between countries and their corporate events to provide access to high-paying clients. In one recording dated November 10, 2012, Blackstone could be heard discussing Sophia specifically. The Laurent girl has gotten too close. She has photos from the Cambodia facility, financial records showing the payments, even testimony from some of the women. If she publishes what she knows, it won't just destroy our operations. It'll bring down the entire network. The recordings revealed that Blackstone had been monitoring Sophia's investigation for weeks, using his position as her mentor to track her progress and identify when she discovered information that posed a threat to his criminal enterprise. Additional files showed that Blackstone had used his fashion empire's resources to facilitate trafficking operations across 3 continents. Private jets owned by his company were used to transport victims. Luxury hotels he owned provided venues for exploitation, and his fashion shows served as fronts for criminal networking events. Armed with this explosive evidence, FBI agents obtained warrants to search Blackstone's current properties and business records. What they found there revealed 13 years of lies and the full scope of a criminal empire that had used fashion as its perfect cover. Hidden in Blackstone's Manhattan penthouse were detailed records showing payments to criminal organizations across Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. The records revealed that his trafficking network had victimized over 3,000 women over the past 2 decades, generating hundreds of millions in illegal profits disguised as legitimate fashion industry revenue. More disturbing were surveillance files Blackstone had kept on journalists, activists, and government officials who might threaten his operations. The files contained detailed dossiers on dozens of individuals, including planned strategies for intimidation, bribery, or elimination depending on the level of threat they posed. But the most incriminating evidence was found in Blackstone's private office. Video recordings of the night Sophia disappeared, showing her final confrontation with him when she attempted to give him a chance to respond to her allegations before publication. The footage revealed that Sophia had been even braver than anyone realized. Rather than simply publishing her investigation, she had confronted Blackstone directly, giving him an opportunity to address her findings and potentially cooperate with law enforcement. "I know what you've been doing, Richard," Sophia could be seen saying in the recording. "I have evidence of over 400 women who have been trafficked through your facilities. I have financial records showing payments to criminal organizations. I have testimony from survivors who are willing to go on the record." Blackstone's response was captured clearly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sophia. This industry has always involved certain compromises. The women you're so concerned about are getting opportunities they never would have had otherwise. You're threatening not just my business, but an entire economic system." "Opportunities?" Sophia's voice was incredulous. "You're talking about slavery, Richard. These women are being held against their will, forced to work in your factories, and then trafficked to your clients for sexual exploitation. That's not opportunity, that's evil." The conversation ended with Blackstone making what could only be interpreted as a threat. "You need to be very careful, Sophia. People who threaten this network don't just lose their careers, they lose everything. If you publish the story, you'll be putting yourself in more danger than you can imagine." Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Blackstone initially maintained his innocence and claimed the recordings were fabricated. But as additional evidence mounted, including DNA evidence and testimony from trafficking survivors who recognized him from photos, his story began to crumble. The confession came during Blackstone's 8th interrogation session with Agent Walsh and federal prosecutors. After 13 years of living with his secret while publicly advocating for ethical fashion practices, Richard Blackstone finally revealed what had happened to Sophia Laurent on November 16, 2012. According to Blackstone's confession, he had lured Sophia to a private meeting location under the pretense of providing her with additional information for her investigation. But when she refused his offers to buy her silence and reiterated her intention to publish her findings, he had her killed by associates who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Blackstone admitted that Sophia's body had been disposed of in a way that would ensure it was never found. He had spent the following days systematically destroying all evidence of her investigation and using his media connections to control how her disappearance was covered in fashion publications. The confession revealed the sophisticated cover-up that had allowed Blackstone to avoid suspicion for 13 years. His position as Sophia's mentor had given him advance warning of her discoveries and the ability to monitor the investigation into her disappearance. His public participation in the search efforts had been calculated to maintain his reputation while ensuring that the investigation never uncovered his criminal activities. Most horrifying was Blackstone's revelation that Sophia wasn't his first victim. He admitted to being involved in the deaths of at least 6 other journalists and activists over the years who had gotten too close to exposing his trafficking network. The arrest of Richard Blackstone sent shockwaves through the fashion industry that reverberated from New York to Paris to Milan. For 13 years, the fashion world had mourned Sophia Laurent as a passionate advocate whose life had been cut short while fighting for ethical practices. The revelation that she had been murdered by one of the industry's most respected figures, a man who had built his empire on the very exploitation she had died trying to expose, shattered the fashion community's sense of moral legitimacy. Sophia's family, her parents Pierre and Marie Laurent and her younger brother Antoine, finally had answers to the questions that had tormented them for over a decade. But the truth brought devastating realization about how completely they had been deceived. Richard spoke at Sophia's memorial, Marie Laurent said through tears at the press conference announcing Blackstone's arrest. He talked about carrying on her legacy of ethical fashion, about how her work would continue through the foundation he established in her name, all while knowing he had killed her for discovering his crimes. The trial of Richard Blackstone began in March 2025 and lasted 11 months. The prosecution, led by U.S. Attorney Sarah Kim, presented a methodical case built on financial records, recorded conversations, survivor testimony, and evidence from trafficking victims across 3 continents. The defense team attempted to argue that Blackstone was being framed by business competitors and that the recorded conversations had been taken out of context. They portrayed him as a successful businessman who had been wrongly accused by people seeking to destroy his reputation. But the jury wasn't convinced by the defense arguments. The evidence was overwhelming, and testimony from trafficking survivors painted a clear picture of systematic exploitation that had used the glamour of fashion to hide horrific crimes. After deliberating for 42 hours over 6 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, human trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. The evidence showed that Blackstone had not only killed Sophia but had operated the largest trafficking network in fashion industry history. Judge Michael Rodriguez sentenced Richard Blackstone to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive terms for the trafficking and financial crimes. At 58 years old, Blackstone will spend the remainder of his life behind bars for crimes that had remained hidden for 13 years. During the sentencing hearing, dozens of trafficking survivors testified about the abuse they had suffered and the ways Blackstone's network had destroyed their lives. Their testimony revealed the full scope of his criminal enterprise and the courage it had taken for them to come forward. Li Wei, who had been trafficked from China to work in Blackstone's factories and then exploited in his criminal network, addressed the court directly. "Mr. Blackstone stole years of my life, but Sophia Laurent gave me hope that someone would finally tell our stories. She died trying to save women like me from the hell he created. Her courage gave me the strength to survive and eventually escape. She is the reason I can stand here today and make sure he can never hurt anyone else." The collapse of Blackstone Industries triggered investigations into dozens of other fashion companies and resulted in the largest human trafficking prosecution in U.S. history. Several other fashion executives have been arrested, and the industry has been forced to implement unprecedented transparency measures in their supply chains. Sophia Laurent's legacy lives on through the Sophia Laurent Foundation for Fashion Justice, established by her family to support trafficking survivors and advocate for complete supply chain transparency in the fashion industry. Sophia believed that beauty and ethics were not incompatible, Pierre Laurent said at the foundation's inaugural ceremony. She died proving that fashion could be both gorgeous and good, but only if we have the courage to confront the evil that has been hiding in our industry. Through this foundation, her fight for justice continues. The fashion industry has undergone massive reforms in response to Sophia's case, including mandatory supply chain auditing, survivor support programs, and complete restructuring of how major brands monitor their manufacturing partners. Dr. Patricia Walsh, a human rights expert who has studied the case extensively, explains its broader significance. The Sophia Laurent case exposed how legitimate industries can serve as perfect covers for criminal enterprises. When an industry is built on aesthetics and aspiration, it becomes easy to hide ugly truths behind beautiful facades. Sophia's murder was the inevitable result of an industry that prioritized profits and appearances over human dignity. Contemporary fashion schools have embraced Sophia's story as both inspiration and warning. Her methods of investigation, her commitment to ethical consumption, and her refusal to compromise her principles have become required study for students entering the industry. As of today, September 24, 2025, Richard Blackstone remains in federal prison, where he is serving his life sentence. He has shown no remorse for his crimes and continues to maintain that his business practices were standard for the industry. The case serves as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most glamorous facades, that the people who sell us beauty may be hiding the ugliest truths, and that the pursuit of justice in any industry can still be deadly for those who refuse to be silenced by money and power. Sophia Laurent was 26 years old when her life was stolen by someone who had positioned himself as her mentor and champion. Her dreams of transforming fashion into a force for good died with her in a place where she should have been safe, killed by a mogul who had built his empire on the very exploitation she had dedicated her life to exposing. But her memory lives on as a catalyst for change in an industry that had lost its soul, a reminder that true style requires substance, and that authentic beauty can only exist when it doesn't come at the cost of human suffering. The runways and showrooms of fashion capitals around the world continue to showcase creativity and artistry, but Sophia's story serves as a permanent reminder that fashion's greatest responsibility is not to make people look beautiful, but to ensure that beauty is created through beautiful means, without exploitation, without trafficking, and without the sacrifice of vulnerable people whose stories deserve to be told rather than silenced.